Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. I'm very pleased to say that I have a guest coming up. His name is Stephen Hill, who happens to be the president and keynote speaker for an organization called Speak Sobriety, LLC, and he's got a lot to tell you and things that you should be listening to very carefully, because a lot of the people in our country today are absolutely suffering from different psychological, physical kinds of issues due to addictions. So I want to welcome Stephen Hill to the Susan Brender Show. And how are you, Stephen?
I'm good, Susan. Thank you so much for having me on this show. I really appreciate it.
Well, I think this is a very, very valuable subject, and I really believe that our audience is going to find that as an enlightenment. So let's start with the first question, which is, why did you start Speak Sobriety, and what does that name mean to you?
So I started Speak Sobriety because I wanted to put together a substance abuse prevention presentation for students, teachers, parents, especially for students that was real. It was something that would be relatable and emotional. One of the biggest complaints that I got from other students about substance abuse presentations, especially in school systems, was that they were too, I guess you could say, objective. They were very scared straight. They were about facts and statistics, like things like just say no, drugs are bad. But, when you deliver a message in that way, it doesn't hit home with people because it's just not relatable. It's not emotional. And so what really worked for me was hearing a real-life story, hearing what somebody went through, somebody who was young in recovery, who shared their story, and I could relate to so much of it. And I realized that recovery was possible. I mean, this was when I was deep into it. I was 24 years old, and I had barely 30 days sober, and I heard this kid speak. And he was sober for a little over 2 years, and he was 22 years old, which means he got sober when he was 20. And to me, at the time, that was just mind-blowing. It was impossible. And even if it was possible, I didn't think you could be happy. I was miserable when I was getting sober because my entire life revolved around drugs and alcohol. Hearing that real-life story is something that really helped me. And so I wanted to be able to speak about sobriety. My story is not just about the dangers of substance abuse. It's about the benefits of living a clean and sober lifestyle today and all the good things that I have in my life today, which are a direct result of being in recovery.
So many years ago, Mrs. Reagan had said, let's get everybody off drugs. So the way she did it was essentially, she said, get drugs out of, this country. Stop. No drugs. That sounds like, from your perspective, it didn't really work. Do you know anything about that particular program? And why was it some people say it was a success. And you're telling me that those kinds of messages are not.
It's not that it's the message. I know the big one was just say no.
Correct.
And a lot of people in DARE programs use just say no. Well, I like to say take the just out of just say no. Yes, say no, but what if you're a kid who has undiagnosed anxiety disorder and you take a Xanax for your first time and all of a sudden you start to feel better? What if you're a kid who has a group of friends, a good group of friends, who does well in school, has a good family, they play sports, they do everything right, but they start using drugs and you don't want to be around them, and you isolate from your friends, and now you're isolating alone and they're out having a good time, and they're not really seeing serious negative consequences as a result of your use. So what I'm saying is these are complicated issues. It's not as simple as just say no. Because there are so many situations where even some parents are okay with their kids drinking alcohol. Some parents are even okay with their kids smoking marijuana. And so it's not that easy to just say no when you're getting different information from so many different people, and everyone's at different levels too. Some people are able to drink socially and live productive lives. Other people can't even have, like me, can't even have a drop of alcohol. So I like to talk about these issues openly. I like to get other people to talk about their own struggles openly. And starting this conversation is what I think will start some real progress. So people...
Yeah, I hear you, Stephen. One of the things that I find very interesting, and I say interesting but not in a positive way, is that we have movies. For example, I was at a movie the other night, and the message that it gave was so negative and so awful that I just really wanted to scream, like, stop it. People who are producing these things, writing these kinds of things, it's horrendous. And I'm talking about movies that show a lot of people smoking marijuana, drinking like crazy, taking cocaine, all of these different drugs, and it's like an epidemic, and it doesn't kind of indicate to all the people out there, all the youngsters, any positive message. Now, let me just tell you one thing that my husband and I did, which I think was kind of positive for us and positive for our son. When my son was very young, my husband said to him, I'll tell you right now, he said, see that refrigerator? In that refrigerator is beer and wine. And if you ever feel like having a little sip and trying it out, do it. There it is. There's the refrigerator. Go into the refrigerator, but make sure that I am here when you do it. Well, P.S., my son, and I'm going to say knock on wood because I'm a little superstitious, but the reality is that our son felt that it was not so great. He took a sip of whatever, and he said, big deal. And to this date, he doesn't drink at all, and he doesn't take drugs. And that's because we made it available to him, and we told him that we know that it would be interesting for him to try this. So that's the message we sent. And I think that that's an interesting message. What do you think?
So that's almost like the forbidden fruit, where when you know that your parents don't want you to do something and so many people are telling you not to do something or not to try something, it makes you want to try it that much more. And I think that can go a lot of different ways with a lot of different people. One thing that I'm a firm believer in is that this addiction, this disease, and the whole concept of substance use and abuse, there is no one way to deal with this because everybody is different. And everybody's going to react to certain substances and certain triggers in a different way. So what might work for one person will not for another. So
right.
Somebody like me who enjoys that feeling more than somebody who doesn't have that gene, that addiction, they're not going to have the same problems as I did. Whereas when I took that substance, my body reacted in a different way. Now, alcohol wasn't really my thing. I had struggles with marijuana early on, and I did drink, and when I drink, I did a lot of stupid things, but, I was younger, and once I found the opiates, that was it. I remember my first use like it was yesterday. I remember my thought process. I remember everything about it, just thinking to myself, this is what I wanted. This is what I need.
I have to interrupt you, Stephen. Why did you want something like that, and who gave it to you? Was it somebody on the street, or was it a doctor? Because it seems to me that doctors today just dole out those opiates. Somebody tells them, I have pain here, I have pain there. Boom, they write a prescription. So how did you get it?
So I got it when a friend of mine, his sister got her wisdom teeth pulled, and we took the prescription. Now, this was back in 2005. There wasn't as much awareness about it today. There weren't prescription drop boxes at police stations. Those are, drop boxes where people can go and drop off their old prescriptions. Like, there was nothing like that. There was nothing about opioid awareness. There was nothing at all. So people were leaving prescriptions in their house all the time. And I knew that this was a drug that was hard to get your hands on, but that people always wanted. And it had that label on the side of it, controlled substance. And as soon as I saw that, we took it, and me and two of my friends, we each tried it. And we had 3 completely different reactions. One of my friends took it, and it made him nauseous. He didn't like the way it made him feel. Another one of my friends, he took it. He liked the way it made him feel, but didn't think it was anything life-changing. Me, I took it, and I fell in love with the feeling instantly. I was smoking marijuana with it, which increased the effects of the drug, and I remember it so well. And so you get 3 different people take the same drug, and you get 3 different reactions.
Did your parents know about it, Stephen? I mean, were they aware of what you were doing?
So I started with drugs summer going into my sophomore year. That's when I tried a few things my freshman year. I smoked marijuana a few times. I drank a few times, didn't even really get drunk. And so I didn't really do much my freshman year, nothing that would show negative consequences. But my sophomore year, I started to smoke every single day, and I was drinking on the weekends and going out to parties. And so negative consequences started to come in, and that's when they picked up on it. My junior year, I was sent away for my drug use, but this was not for anything really that related to opiates. I hadn't even tried them yet. So my senior year, they didn't really know that much about opiates simply because I couldn't get them that much. They weren't really available to me. The only time we got them was when somebody got a surgery or their wisdom teeth pulled and it was a leftover prescription and we stole it. And that was really the only time that we were able to get our hands on them in high school. But as soon as I got out of high school, this epidemic was just booming. And I can't even tell you how I was able to get my hands on so many of these pills. I mean, in the most ridiculous ways imaginable. And pills that were very, very strong. I mean, 80 milligram Oxycontin pills that were just so strong and they were so available to. I mean, I had so many different connections for them.
Oh my God!
And I became addicted very quickly. And
Now let's talk a little bit about your program, because I know that you have this very special program that you kind of give to teachers and parents to learn about the dangers of drug addiction. So tell us a little bit about your program. What is it like, and have you had a great success with it?
Absolutely. So I started this. Well, I'll just say the first time I was ever asked to speak, I think it was about 6 or 8 months sober, somewhere around there, where I was a resident staff member at a extended care program in Connecticut. I was there for a year, but towards the end of my stay, I became a house manager, so I was like a staff member and still a resident in the program. And the program director asked me and 2 other staff members to go to a high school and speak to the kids. So we went there, and we all spoke for a little while, and it went really well, and we got some positive feedback because of it. Then I ended up speaking in a few town hall meetings on the opioid epidemic. I was asked to speak at a Catholic school, and then all of a sudden I realized that this is something that I could really do, and so I put together a substance abuse prevention presentation. Basically, the way that I did it was I picked a topic that was relevant to substance abuse and mental health too, and I found a part of my story that I can tell that relates to that topic, because just saying drunk driving is bad, I mean, that doesn't really hit home. But then if I tell you a story about a friend of mine who lost her life drinking and driving on the way to my house while I was waiting for him, that might hit home a little bit more for you than just you see how it really plays out in real life. And so I tell my story. I handpick certain parts of my story that are not delivered in a way where it's like war story, which is like what you were talking about with the movies that you see, where it glorifies the use. And it's gone very well, and I've gotten endorsed by some really special people that have worked in this field for a very long time. I've spoken at a lot of different schools all over New Jersey, Connecticut, New York. I've spoken at a few colleges, and next year, booked for a lot of schools already in October when the school year starts again, and it's been really good. And I speak for about 40-45 minutes usually. We do a Q&A, and then I stay afterwards, and I meet with students individually all the time, and I get students to open up about their own struggles. I mean, I've even had a student or 2 ask for my help about them telling their story. And sometimes it's not even about substance abuse. Some people have asked about eating disorders, about anxiety and depression. So all of this ties together, and I think that the most important thing is getting people to not be ashamed of what they're going through, and to get their friends and family to be able to speak up when they see something is wrong. And
so if I ask you, Stephen, how prevalent this is, I assume that what you're going to say is that it's all over the nation practically, and probably all over the world. Am I correct? In terms of the addictions.
Yes, it's everywhere, and I think a lot of people have gotten better with it. There used to be kind of a stigma with the school systems that I was told about by certain. I've been blessed to have the guidance of a lot of different administrators, principals, and assistant principals that work in different school districts all throughout the tri-state area, and some of them told me that it used to be looked at as your school has a problem if you're bringing in a speaker talking about substance abuse, where a lot of schools would be like, well, we don't have those problems here, where really it has nothing to do with the school. It has nothing to do with being a good or a bad kid. Substance abuse has nothing to do with that. And so I think schools have gotten a lot better with understanding how this affects everybody. And
absolutely,
a lot of schools are doing like wellness day events now, and I think that is so important. I've been asked to speak at a few wellness day events, and I'm going to do a few next year as well. And I just think that this is what we really a good message that we really need to be sending to our youth.
Well, let me ask you this: schools. Do you believe that schools should put this as part of their curriculum? It seems to me that what they're trying to do right now is to get people to know more math, to know more science, to know that. But this is a very big problem, and it's prevalent all over, as I said, all over the world. So if you had an opportunity to tell a principal that it should be put in the curriculum, what do you think that they would say?
So I think it depends on what the principal is. So I know you know Mark Hoberman, and he's my co-author of my memoir that I published 2 months ago. It's called A Journey to Recovery, Speak Sobriety, and we are going to be working with schools. We presented our book at his old high school. He was an English teacher for 33 years, and we did a writing process workshop on my memoir. And the assistant principal came in, one of the crisis counselors sat in on it, and they're having us back next year. They're having me back for the assembly. They're having us back for the writing process workshop. We're going to write a Common Core curriculum, and it's that's going to go along as like a study guide for the book. And so far, I mean, with this one school that we've really presented it to, we just started doing it. We've gotten positive feedback on it, and I do believe that this is the type of thing that can really play out in a classroom environment. I mean, my presentation is one thing, but my memoir, my book, is a whole other. It goes into great detail from my life way before drugs, how I came from a good family, how I had struggles early on with ADHD, and you hear my entire story in depth, and it's I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from it.
Yeah, and it sounds like it would make for a great documentary or a great movie. People need to see, and they need to hear, and they need to know a little bit more about people like you, because as you said before, nobody would have expected that you would become addicted to opiates or drugs. Nobody would have thought about that, because you seem like such a great student and so smart, and it just, what can I say? Now, this is another thing that I'm interested in knowing about, and that is when you consult with families who are experiencing struggles with their children who are addicted to drugs and alcohol, what do you tell them?
So I started doing this after I started speaking. Once I started speaking at all these different events, and I'm on social media, and I have my website, all of a sudden people started reaching out to me saying, my son, usually the way it goes is, my son is addicted to heroin, please help. Sometimes it's a daughter too, but the most frequent call that I get is usually from a mother, and she's telling me that her son, usually between 23 and 32 years old, somewhere around there, is addicted to heroin. The story is almost always the same. good kid, marijuana and alcohol in high school, started with painkillers. Either they broke their arm, broke their leg, or they had wisdom teeth pulled, or they stole a prescription from somebody, and they went from oxycodone to Oxycontin to heroin, and now they're shooting themselves with heroin. It's almost the same story all the time.
Wow.
And so my parents made a lot of mistakes in treatment. They spent a lot of money in places they really didn't need to, and they didn't know how long somebody who has opioid addiction needs to really give themselves a real chance at recovery. I mean, a 28-day program for someone who's been abusing opioids for several years, it's just not going to work. I mean, I won't say that it will never work. I don't ever like to say never, but I will tell you that I don't know any opioid addicts who have beat opioid addiction and have gone to a 28-day program, came home, and they were cured. I mean, this whole concept of a 28-day program, I think, is for your classic alcoholic who they didn't see their alcoholism really show negative consequences until later on in their life. They're a law-abiding citizen. They have a job. They have a family. They have a home. And their alcoholism got out of control, and they went to a 28-day program. They came home. They attended AA meetings, and now they're able to stay sober. I think that works. But for somebody with opioid addiction, it is so powerful, and it takes such a long time to be able to recover. But the problem is that a lot of it has to do with insurance and your financial situation. In order to afford these really good programs that will give you a really good shot at recovery, you need to have money, because insurance companies will only pay for inpatient treatment. They will not pay for any type of residential and extended care. It's just
let's address this for a second. You said that insurance companies won't cover it. Now, is it the insurance company's responsibility to give some money, if you will, to people who have gotten on opiates and other drugs? Because whose responsibility is it? Is it theirs? Is it the parents? Is it yours? I mean, don't you think that once you do something like that, it is not the responsibility of insurance companies? I want to know your opinion about that.
Are you saying it's not, that if you end up addicted to drugs, it's not the responsibility?
Personally, I would love if the insurance companies would, pay for people to get well, because certainly you want a country made up of people who, are responsible, they do great jobs, they don't become part of this, what should we call it, this addiction? Epidemic. That's the word, this epidemic. So my question to you is, whose responsibility is it to take care of you, to get you sober?
I mean, at the end of the day, you have to want it for yourself. There is a misconception that people say, oh, well, they have to hit bottom first. They have to want it for themselves. And that's not completely true. So I didn't want recovery for myself on day one. I was there because the criminal justice system put me there. I mean, they didn't actually put me there, but I really had no other choice but to go into treatment. I didn't want recovery on day 30, day 60, or 90. It wasn't until month 5 or around 5.5, 6 months that I actually woke up in the morning and realized drugs wasn't the first thing on my mind.
Right.
And so how do you expect somebody whose life is just in shambles, has absolutely nothing going for them, and has criminal charges and has a drug addiction to be gung-ho about recovery? I mean, it's not realistic. And so what I say is that you don't need to hit this rock bottom. You just need to be able to be put into an environment where you can get to a point where you want recovery for yourself. And that's what I was fortunate enough to receive. And I went to an extended care program for a year, and then I ended up working there for a year. And before that, I went to 6 or 7 28-day programs, and my relapse after I would get out of the program would be quicker every single time. The first time I lasted for a few months, then it was a month, then it was a week, then it was barely even a day, and I was out and I was right back to it. And so we realized after so many failed attempts that you need a longer period of time for a lot of these different issues, and extended care is so important. And so I see families who have a kid struggling with addiction and possibly mental health issues to go along with it. And the first thing they do is they go into Google and they type in best treatment recovery center in country. And they'll be willing to pay an absurd amount of money to save their kid, thinking that this 30 or 28-day program, where it's going to cost them an absurd amount of money out of pocket, is going to save their kid's life. And I can't tell you how many times I've had people reach out to me and say, I sent my kid to the Karen Foundation, which is an amazing program, but sending your kid to the Karen Foundation for 28 days after they've been abusing heroin for multiple years and then just coming home, it's not going to work. And so people spend this money in ways where I would rather them send them to an inpatient facility that's not as expensive if you can't afford it, and save that money for extended care. If you're somebody who's in a really good financial position, then of course, yes, you send them to the best level of care no matter what. But in my opinion, the most important thing is time for your brain and body to heal. I would much rather send somebody to St. Christopher's, which is a facility that takes Medicaid, over a place that's $70,000 a month, because if you're in
how much did you say? How much?
$70,000 a month. Some of the top facilities are an absurd amount of money, and I would much rather send you to a place where you're going to be there for an extended period of time than somewhere else.
You brought up something very interesting. The recovery centers are just popping up all over. Apparently they're getting some money from the government, or they're being given money from certain funds. I really don't know, but I see it. I see it in my own town where I live. It's one of the highest recovery centers in the world, believe it or not. It's a small town. But somehow people believe that these centers are going to really do the trick, and they're, like you said, 28 days, but they keep on popping up. So isn't there a necessity for people to, like yourself, to expose them, to make it people aware that these places are just making lots of money and they really don't do the trick?
Yeah, so a 28-day program by itself for opioid addiction is most likely not going to do the trick, but the thing is, a 28-day program is necessary, though, because it's a start. It's a start that it's just one of many steps. So I would not say that a 28-day program is a waste of time. It's the start. And then from there, you need to go to extended care. But the problem is that even if you can get insurance to cover your inpatient program, once you move into an extended care program, you're not getting that covered. So you have to know how to navigate treatment and the different levels of care in order to give your son or your daughter or your loved one a really good chance of recovery, and that's what I do. That's where I come into play. So I have a lot of different friends that work in this field in all different levels of care, all different facilities across the country, and so I meet with the family. I first try and get the family in a place where they're ready to do whatever is necessary to get their loved one the treatment that they need. And then I have to look at their financial situation, their insurance, and I go from there and present them with multiple options, and I negotiate on their behalf. I try and get the price knocked down as much as possible so they can save money to keep their loved one in treatment for as long as possible.
Well, we're almost at the end of the show, and there's one last question that I have for you, and that is, can you remind us again how our listeners can learn more about what you do and how they contact you for further information?
Absolutely. You can visit my website, speaksobriety.com. That's SpeakSobriety.com. There's a contact tab on there. You can fill that out, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. You can also get my memoir, which is A Journey to Recovery, Speak Sobriety. That's on my website as well. It's available on Amazon. So anyone who has any questions about anything, whether it's treatment planning, school assembly, anything at all, I can be contacted by just visiting my website.
Well, today my guest has been Stephen Hill, who is the president and keynote speaker for Speak Sobriety, LLC, and he's doing a marvelous job, and he's making people aware of problems that exist all over the world, as I said before. And I think you should try to read his book, because I think he really touches upon every aspect of this whole notion of people taking drugs and how you get off them. So thank you, Stephen Hill, for being on the Susan Brender Show. I am delighted that you gave out all this information.
Thank you so much, Susan. I really appreciate it.
Back in my day, to become an author, you had to master your craft. You needed a team that you could trust, a team that would never flinch in battle. Back in my day, you would risk losing your rights and pay outrageous amounts for terrible service. Well, yesterday is not today. Gladiator Publishing Company has a century-long reputation for defending writers and readers and winning awards for their record-setting low-cost services and market sales. They are 75 to 80% more cost-effective and never touch your royalties or copyrights. Go with a publisher that is so transparent that they have their contract on their webpage. Have your book treated with honesty, loyalty, and respect, period. Visit us at gladiatorpublishing.com or text us at 417-291-9162.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.